coming. On behalf of the Atheist Society, I'd like to thank not only yourself, but also our three speakers, Matt, Aaron, and Seth, who have come all the way over from the US for a Unholy Trinity tour, where they'll be spreading reason, skepticism, and dangerous ideas across our nation. So I'd like to please join me in giving a round of applause for them. To kick things off, I'll introduce Adam as well. Adam is the herd mentality guy for any of you who follow the podcasts. He puts out a fabulous, I think it's a fortnightly podcast these days. It's not fabulous. It is a wonderful podcast that comes out every fortnight, which is well worth a listen. And Adam will be emceeing, so to speak, for our event today. If you want to get up and give us an introduction, we'll kick it off.
I thought I'd give you a pause, Tim, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, so yes, we're all here. You guys have come a very, very long way to be here, and it's all about you guys. It's a Q&A. So what I'll do is pass the microphone around. You can drive this. Just tell us your name and maybe where you're from if you're from another place. Ask a question, hand the microphone back, and leave it in the capable hands of these guys. Do you all know where these guys are from and what they've done? There's a few people smiling and nodding. Everyone know Matt? Yes, absolutely.
Hi.
Matt specifically asked no questions about his tattoo. Please ask a question about his tattoo. And Aaron. Everyone knows about Aaron? Seen his work on YouTube? He's been recognised more so than Matt so far at the airport. It took about 4 minutes after getting off the plane. A guy ran up to him and had a chat for about half an hour. These guys have been very generous with their time, and yeah, it's nice to have a little intimate audience where you can really spend some time getting your question answered. And Seth, everyone know who Seth is?
If not, listen to this. Say
hi. Seth hosts the Thinking Atheist podcast. And it's got a huge audience as well. So, guys, thank you. So, who's got a question? This is how it works at universities. You guys are sort of here to think.
If you don't have any, this is going to suck.
Yes. Hello, name and number.
My name is Angelos, number is 24601. So one of the things that I find interesting when I'm dealing with atheism is there is a reasonable overlap between some areas of atheism and militant atheisms and MRA movement or red pill movements. And I find it really confronting because, you know, you want to have a rational conversation with them and you think you should be able to have a rational conversation, but often I find there's as much doctrinal thinking there as other areas that you might encounter. What are your experiences with this and how might you go about having conversation and or dealing with this kind of interaction?
I don't. I've tried and I don't completely understand all of it. There are some good points that are made. It's one of those things that reminds me of the way conspiracy theories get constructed, where you take disparate facts and you weave together a narrative that kind of at the surface looks like there may be something there. When you dig a little deeper, it may not be the case. And there's so much misunderstanding about labels, and it doesn't matter whether, you know, there are people who identify as, for example, feminists who say one thing, there are others who might say something else, and so there's confusion about what the hell does this label mean and who am I talking about. And so I just kind of set it all aside and give me an issue. I will happily talk to you about an issue, change my mind, listen to the information you're going to present. And if it's one of the conversations useless, or I don't think we're going to make any progress, then we'll just go our separate ways. I don't think the problem is nearly as big as the online community might make it out to be. Running around to various groups in different countries, I find a lot of the same things, a lot of the same problems, a lot of the same types of people. And I got tired of dealing with the bickering and the kind of some of the behind the scenes drama. And I just decided I'm going to focus on producing videos, educating people, doing debates. Let somebody else worry about, you know, the money or who's sleeping with who or who is trying to poison the movement or change the label. I don't have the time for that anymore.
my experience with this is that if you, I used the feminist label to describe myself once upon a time because a feminist in my understanding was somebody that does not impose unfair biases based on gender, right? And that doesn't mean that I don't acknowledge that there's a difference, between the main division of the genders, and then let's just ignore the obscured lines between where they will be. But if you use that label to describe yourself, you will be inundated with trolls for the next few years of everything you ever post will have somebody wanting to start that argument. It doesn't matter how irrelevant to feminism that is. If you use the F word, not in a derogatory way, you're going to be bombarded forever after that. And if you ever say that government, even a minimal government, has any actual job or responsibility to its citizenry, then you will be labeled a statist, or somebody who worships the state. You're right, it's doctrinal thing, and they always tell me that feminism is a religion. It's not even something I often talk about. I mean, I mentioned it once, right? So I'm somehow having this religion of this thing that I mentioned once. It's really bizarre, the kind of reaction that I get, and I can see that there are people within the feminist movement, and we would all accept the feminists, who say things that I can't agree with because, I think that's being a little bit dramatic or over the top or what have you. Let's reel it back in and concentrate on what the focus should be. And I think there's going to be extremes in any fashion. I would also think that the people that recognize themselves as feminists should also be the ones to rein in, where there are extremes and say, no, let's focus more on this. And it's not going to get corrected by people on the outside who have fantastically bad arguments for their position. I won't entertain any good idea if they had any, but unfortunately they don't. And I don't know what your position is on this if you have one. Probably best not to say anything, just let me keep mine.
I'm glad I can show up here, but.
I pre-recorded 2 of the radio shows for the 2 weeks that I've gone. The show that airs next week is with the host of the Cognitive Dissonance radio podcast, and the issue of feminism came up. And at the end of the conversation on the air, the host of Cognitive Dissonance said to me, he said, by the way, RIP your inbox, because you were about to receive an avalanche of hate and death and whatnot. But when we were having the conversation, there were 2 things I thought were relevant. One is that the relative anonymity of the internet makes people behave in ways they would not behave face to face. I mean, if you and I had a disagreement about any issue, feminism or otherwise, and you're standing next to me, we can talk like we're people. We don't necessarily see each other in caricature, right? Not usually. But when you were on the internet, and one of the CG guys, or cognitive dissonance guys, said it this way, when you are driving like a Humvee, a huge vehicle, and you feel invincible and somebody cuts you off in traffic, you are acting differently than you might in another situation. And people often, when they're sort of buried behind the internet and are acting in relative anonymity, become inflammatory often for its own sake. And there are 2 words I like to keep in mind: positive conflict. I love conflict. I need conflict. It keeps me honest. But we need to be operating in good faith and have positive conflict. And whenever this issue seems to come up, it almost immediately just devolves into, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be talked about. I just think we have to do a much better job of choosing our battles so we don't waste our time.
Thank you. Has anyone heard the Cognitive Dissonance podcast?
Yeah.
A couple of people? Yes.
When you hear the amount of swearing they do, you will have to ask yourself, do they have Tourette's? No, they do not. They're actually wonderful guys, and they do different topics every single week, and they're really good fellows.
Yeah, they do a news show. It's very amusing. So, next question. Pass it over to Tim.
Thank you. I'm Tim, as you know. I suppose
We love you, Tim.
The question I have is, throughout almost every argument I get into when it comes to theism and atheism, it inevitably seems to come back to the moral argument and the understanding of objective versus subjective versus inherent morality or absolute morality. And I was wondering how you go about differentiating or delineating between the 3 and how you approach the topics.
And objective morality is going to have reasons why something is moral or immoral, if such a thing exists at all. Now, a subjective morality is the "'cause I said so" argument. And if you take "'cause I say so" and change that to "'cause my God said so," it doesn't change it into an objective argument. It's still subjective. Because when God says, "Thou shalt not kill," and then the next scene says, "Kill every man and his brother," that's subjective and it's arbitrary. But if there's a reason why something is moral or immoral, and it's not just because God said so, then we can look at God and base Him on, look at the standard for what is moral, and we can see that God is not moral. So wherever we get our morals from, obviously isn't coming from that. And when people walk away from religion, they don't turn around and start running, raping, killing people in the streets. As a matter of fact, statistically, at least in the United States, more child molestation, more violence, more support for capital punishment is coming from the evangelicals. So where are they getting their morality from? Their God seems to be lax in all of that. And why is Isaac Asimov and Carl Sagan, why didn't they run around raping and killing everybody? When you walk away from religion, you tend to be, according to the statistics provided by the Clergy Project, whenever pastors no longer believe their own BS, they start voting more liberally. They become more tolerant. They're more accepting of homosexuals and things of this nature. So it seems to be that religion is actually imposing an immoral stance and then lying about whether it's objective or subjective.
So on the topic of this always coming up, I did, the very first big public debate I did was on the source of human morality, and it was a strange debate, which I'll do a review of on my Patreon project at some point. But then I went and I did other topics, does God exist, and blah, blah, blah. And I think of all the debates that I've done, there are only two that didn't ultimately come back to the topic of morality, irrespective of what the topic was supposed to be. And I did a talk a while ago about the superiority of secular morality. And I revised that a number of times, and I'm kind of tweaking my thoughts about it. Number one is that secular moral systems, whether they're objective or subjective ultimately, and there can be arguments about it, they're about getting better at getting better. They are proper systems. They are trying to give you the tools you need to be able to evaluate situations. Simple things like, think globally and act locally, and what would the world be like if everybody did what I just did? These kinds of tools to think about it. Whereas religions don't have moral systems. They make moral pronouncements. Don't do this, do this, don't do this, do this. It's a little list, you can check it, and it's not very robust. And it doesn't convince people. There's thousands of different denominations of Christianity that agree and disagree on virtually every point of doctrine and what is or isn't moral, and then it gets broader when you leave Christianity to all the other religions as well. So this idea, it used to be they would go with Psalm 14:1. The fool has said in his heart there is no God, they are corrupt, they can do no good thing. And that was so obviously wrong because there were plenty of godless people running around doing all kinds of good things. The Foundation Beyond Belief and other charitable organizations that are entirely secular. So now the argument has shifted to something a little bit more philosophical, which is, if there is no God, then there can be no objective source for morality. And Aaron's already kind of covered that aspect of it. My take on it is similar to Sam Harris's, that he puts out in the Moral Landscape, maybe subtly different. But to the extent, when I say that morality is subjective or anything subjective, it's contingent upon somebody's opinion or personal preference and individual. When I say it's objective, I mean that it's not contingent upon that, which doesn't mean that it's not contingent upon us. It's all about us. And maybe we're using the wrong label for it. Sam tries to go with well-being. But my quick take is we're physical beings in a physical universe. We are unable to identify anything beyond the physical, which means my actions have consequences, which are a direct result of those physical rules. And those consequences affect me and others. And so for any given situation, if there's a finite set of actions, there must be one or more actions that represent what would be the moral pinnacle for that situation. And there are people who are confused over the difference between situational ethics, which I'm an advocate of, and moral relativism, which is this idea that whatever a culture says is moral is just moral. Like if your culture practices slavery and you're all okay with it, then it's moral. No, that they're wrong. And all they ever had to do was ask the slaves, hey, are you guys okay with this? Hell no! I don't know why it's so hard, but it is a sticking point, because there's this fear that society will collapse, and there's this fondness, as we were talking about the other day, for the good old days, when in fact we are living in the best new days by virtually every measure. As the world becomes more secular, more enlightened, as we start to break down barriers, when we interact with people from cultures that are different from our heritage, we learn more. That's all I really need, is this idea that we're going to learn more about getting better.
I'm good. Amen. Preach it. If I may, I'd like to ask some questions of you. I want to understand really what you're up against out there. Can you tell people, and you can raise a hand on, you can say it out loud, can you tell people that you are atheist without being ostracized? Here?
Yeah.
Yes. Largely yes. Do you hear the standard arguments from, say, creationists? Do you hear the Adam and Eve argument? Do you hear the morality argument? Do you hear those types of things? What are the big challenges then that you see that you are facing, if any, in this particular culture or region?
Sorry, g'day. I don't know, I can only speak from, I guess I'm from northwest of Sydney, but never ever come across creationism until I jumped online. I'm 35. I went to a very, very strict Catholic school who were completely down the line with Darwin and all of the physical sciences, so it was never that level of right-wing stuff that I've only learned, like I said, from being online is something very new to me. I can't speak for everybody else. I don't know if there is a massive push for that level of stupidity in this country.
I think the question is there a challenge, and what is the nature of the challenge that you face as skeptics in this particular area?
Hi, my name's Aaron. One thing I find is that when you try to have a discussion about it, there's no real extremism except occasionally people will come up to you when you're eating lunch. I had that happen like once in my 5 years on campus. But apart from that, it's like religion will pop up in a context and you like say you're an atheist and other people are like, nah, I don't really believe in anything, but I believe in something. Or they're like, yeah, I believe in God a bit, but you can't have a conversation about it. Like, it's just stonewalled. It's like, nah, you just can't open up a conversation. That's what I think is the issue we have here. Not so much extremism, but just trying to open up a dialogue with some of the more moderates out there.
Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's like fighting a comic.
So I would say,
Fucking arm off ignorance.
so I want to change the whole world. That's ultimately my goal. I know religions probably aren't going to go away, and I'm not going to paint with a broad brush to say that religion is necessarily a problem. Religion is a symptom of a problem, which is our own irrationality, our need for answers and filling it in. And so if I ran across more people who didn't, try to put their religion in your face or try to enact laws based on their religious views, I'd probably be out of work. Because I'd still prefer that I lived in a world where everybody accepted the truth to the extent that they can and can understand it. But I don't, like if I'm out, to lunch or dinner and the people at the table next to me are praying, I don't go over and, hey, you realize that what you're doing really doesn't do anything. I'd never do that. I think the calls come in on the show. I don't go door to door, have you stopped believing in Jesus? It just doesn't make any sense. It's not that I would be completely happy if people just kept it to themselves. I would just be less unhappy if when you're actively out trying to do things. So maybe we run into different problems then.
I'll take it from a different angle. It's probably a lot of apathy, I would say about it. I go to a different campus. I go to campus in America. I go to City College of Arts. We're all basically artists, and a lot of people don't believe in God, but they're really just apathetic about the issue. And I mean, that's probably not really a problem at all. But we have at the moment a Prime Minister who happens to be Catholic, if I'm not mistaken, and he's really started, wants to dedicate certain funds to certain education projects and stuff like that. And when you're apathetic, I don't think so many people, they care a little bit, at least for my engagement and stuff. So it's not so much that you get people who are extremely religious because they're not. I've been quite anti-religious all my life, despite the fact that I also went to a Catholic school. But yeah, there's just a lot of apathy, I think, and a lot of people just go, well, let them believe what they want to believe. And I think for the most part, living in a country like Australia, that's pretty okay. But I think when it gets to like how we run the government a bit, especially, like last prime minister we had was an atheist, but now we have Tony Abbott, he used to be Catholic, so not that a lot of his policies are dictated that way, but it could be a problem, I guess, at some point.
These gentlemen may disagree with me, I don't know, I haven't really had this conversation with them, but I don't think apathy is something that, people who say, you know what, I don't really care, live and let live, it doesn't bother me, let people do what they want, and this is their way of they consider it kind of a high road. I'm not going to steal someone else's joy, who am I to tell them what to think? And they often will feel that this is an enlightened position. It's like that bumper sticker that says coexist, and it has all the different religious symbols on it. And I'm like, if everybody was apathetic, perhaps, or everybody had the same sort of tempo about what they believe, but if you are apathetic about the state of the world, about the falsehoods being pitched as truth, then you are essentially allowing the hugely well-motivated, non-apathetic fundamentalist machine, any fundamentalist machine, be it religious or government or otherwise, to have the entire playing field, because they're not taking your position of live and let live. They're taking the position of, I'm going to change minds for my particular deity. And so I try to encourage people, it sounds good on the surface, it makes you feel good to say, I don't ever want to, whatever people want, good for them. I don't think it's quite that simple. It's like what Robert Green Ingersoll once said. He said, the more false we destroy, the more room we make for the true. It's not enough to be about truth, we must address the falsehoods. I just did a broadcast on the Unitarian Church, and one of the challenges I do have with Unitarians, they allow almost everybody to come in and have a seat at the table, and they have messages about everything from atheism to humanism to astrology to, Quakers living on the moon, that kind of thing. And they consider their open door to be lauded. We have a big tent and all are welcome. But if you're never once prepared to say, this is actually false, demonstrably false, then how can your life really be a truthful life?
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you in the slightest. There's this idea that, you're safe, there's this idea that liberal and moderate believers of any religion are prime targets for the secular movement to go out and engage with, because they've already partially gotten rid of some stuff, and so there's actually an imam who said that he likes atheists better because the Quran says there is no God but Allah, and atheists said there is no God, so they're already halfway there. But I think the opposite is true, and I've actually argued for this as someone who may not always have the accent, but identifies as a redneck atheist, the general blue collar that's, well, I'm not too fond of Walmart, but I have shopped there. I think that the fundamentalist is not only where the problem is, but that's the prime area. Because if the foundation of what you believe is something that's so fundamentally false, like a 6,000-year-old earth, when you start knocking that away, it crumbles. The liberal and moderates, they have this wishy-washy, oh, God is whatever, and yes, I don't take that literally. We're not those Christians. Yes, we believe that Jesus walked on water, but, he's a miracle worker. We don't believe in a global flood. So they've gotten rid of, they've distilled it down to just the core elements. These are critical for salvation, and that's what I'm going to believe. And those are just as false, and they act as cover for the fundamentalists. And so when you educate people on the misinformation they've been given, it's the fundamentalists, it's the dogmatists that are going to crumble. And also, they're the ones who are going to be among the best advocates on our side. In the U.S., so probably through most of the northern area, religion's not too big of a deal. They're fairly liberal, blue states, etc. And atheist groups are not nearly as active there either. It's in the Bible Belt where people are trying to impose their religious beliefs that we find the most vocally active proponents of secularism, skepticism, atheism, rationalism, etc. And so it may be that you guys don't have to deal with those problems to the same extent that we do. But yeah, maybe your target audience are the apatheists, to get them to care a little more about stuff.
2 seconds, if I may. I think what you were alluding to earlier was the National School Chaplaincy Program. We're all familiar with what's going on here? Do we like it?
Can you flesh that out for me and for any listeners?
Who would like to elaborate on that? Just get one non-student in the room, ladies and gentlemen, the other organiser. Give a round of applause.
Andrew speaking on with the Atheist Foundation Australia, we're organising, putting the 3 of these guys down and fairly active in the movement behind the scenes, I guess you'd say. Speaking of the apathy thing and what Seth and the others have said, is because Australians are generally laid back and generally apathetic about things, and we don't really let it bother us, we get on with our lives and we're essentially secular. It does mean that people like the Australian Christian lobby can earn, through whatever means, I don't know how, but I've seen some of their financials, $2 million a year is what they take in. And they use that money to lobby the government for their agenda. And there have been studies that you don't know what they post on, and most of the stuff is homophobic.
Anti-marriage equality.
Yeah, anti-marriage equality, some stuff on abortion, things like that. And that's what they push. And there needs to be somebody on the other side, maybe being equally as forceful in the other direction, and say we need somebody fighting for secular people, we need somebody fighting for equality, we need somebody saying, you know what, it's not really right that we spend $800 million putting chaplains into schools and then telling them that they can't be chaplains. And we've got religious people who are hired on the basis of their professed religious beliefs. And then they're told that they can't proselytise, they can't act religious, but they're there to support the children. And that opens up all sorts of loopholes when they get dragged off into church camps and given the fear of hell. I don't think that's right. So we at the AFA work against that. We've got a small group of active committee members, and in weeks time we've got the AGM coming up in Melbourne. So if you're not a member, I do encourage it, actually. And if you want some more events like these, with the Unholy Trinity and others that are coming down, support us and come along and see these guys. That's all I really want to say.
Well, it would be advantageous for us to have fewer apathetic atheists or apatheists. If they would take an interest in what's going on and how their world is being manipulated against their will and their inaction, it would also be helpful if the secular Muslims and secular Christians would wake up to the fact that they are also their votes and their financial support are being used by extreme groups, again, to lobby, to establish legislation that doesn't make any sense and is wrong on many levels. I mean, when you talk to many Christians, they'll tell you, we're not those Christians like you described, right? Why are they not? Well, it's because of how much of their religion they've let go of, how little of it they still hold on to. So look at the people that really embrace that religion. This is the extreme of it, right? So if people are walking away from religion, this is how they're calling themselves moderate or reasonable. I mean, then they need to be aware of, if you want to use that label, this is the way you're being represented, right? I mean, once upon a time in 1992, I saw Pat Robertson, leader of the 700 Club, tell his 30,000 some odd followers to go out and kill homosexuals where you find them, because he said that would prevent earthquakes. Because he said that earthquakes were happening in the United States because God was punishing our country, because he said the United States was the only country that allowed homosexuals to live. You can say stuff like this when you're a religious leader. The people in the following need to be the ones to put the brakes on that sort of thing.
So, for clarity, did he actually say go out and kill them, or did he say this was our punishment for allowing them to live?
It was a long time ago, and I didn't get a recording of it, but to the best of my memory, he said, either do it or we should do it.
Subtle difference.
We have another question.
What was the 700 Club? Or what is the 700 Club?
700 Club's a television network that Pat Robertson put together. It's basically an evangelical news and information source. It's where my mom gets all of her medical information, or did once upon a time when she wanted me to take all kinds of crazy things for my diabetes, and that didn't usually work out.
Pat Robertson is weekly on a website called Right Wing Watch. I strongly encourage checking it out. You just get the little sound bites, little snippets, and
Just look up Pat Robertson quotes.
Yeah.
Is it a TV show or TV network?
It's a TV it's a TV show on the Trinity Broadcast Network. Is that what they're on? Yeah. And he's getting older, and it's kind of funny to watch because he was a lawyer and he was very active, and for years he was like the voice, to many people.
Ran for president.
Yes, and has an amazing mansion on a hill, but lately he's kind of losing it, and so he's come out in favor of legalizing marijuana, which shocks some people. But there's Ray Comfort was on there with him. I don't blame you. I was in New Zealand the past few days. I blamed them. I'll blame you guys for Ken Ham. He was on there, and it's just there's like somebody Pat Robertson gives us predictions every year, the messages that he got from God for the coming year. So you can look up his success rate. Spoiler alert, sucks. But he will sit there, and these days he's got a woman who will sit there who will ask him the questions in the email. She's actually started steering him a little bit to clarify, because the answers that immediately come out of his mouth are way the hell out there.
it's invariably demons. Whenever there's something going wrong, your kid has demons.
Unless it has to do with money, because there was the elderly couple that said that they were in their 80s and they can no longer afford their mortgage payments and things like that. How do they continue to pay tithe? They don't know what to do. And so his answer to that email was that they can sell their property and get jobs.
He also warned his audience, if you buy secondhand clothing, you want to pray over each garment, as you don't know if it was previously infected with evil. It was perhaps demon-possessed apparel, and you'll want to sort of demonize your clothes.
Is that Pat Robertson?
Yes. And when Katrina hit the New Orleans area, Pat Robertson blamed it on the gays and lesbians and Satanists and atheists. And the funny thing was that the homosexual population in New Orleans was around like the French Quarter. That's the only part that was really kind of spared. And so Jeff T, who was doing nonprofits with us at the time, came up with this idea that there's a magical gay shield that penetrates. And so he sends a storm in and it misdirects it off to, all of the poor people who've been donating most of their money to him all those years.
Fabulous on chariots. Question?
I'm David. I just had a question. I guess it's one of the things that I notice here would be you can't, like everyone said, you can say you're an atheist, but a lot of people seem to misunderstand that term and take it as you're a militant atheist, you're a polar, completely, you think you know everything, sort of thing. That's what I tend to get as a response, and then I have to usually explain myself. And then I guess the question was one of the arguments I find that's more difficult, that usually results in just walking away from them, is the one about the fundamental laws of the universe, what governs logic, what governs evidence and all that, and they start digging down to that level, and then it gets to a point where it goes on too long, and it's almost not worth talking. I just want to hear what, I guess, your attempts at that.
Well, first of all, on the concept of a militant atheist, I don't know anybody who is more militant in his atheism than me. So if I use myself as the standard of the extreme, then I don't think we have that much to worry about. I'm really not violent at all. The only problem is that I have ideas and they conflict with a lot of really stupid, simple ideas. As far as when you start talking about what is the basis for this and this and this, and you want to keep dragging it back, again, eventually you'll get to the microscopic level where it's too small to see, and that's where they can start putting their God in. Right? That's pretty much the concept. I mean, when people start talking about how the first life came about, or how the universe was initially constructed, or what happened before the Big Bang, if we can go to a nonsensical question like that, regardless what the answer to that is, it doesn't change the fact that humans are biologically classified as a subset of apes. That remains a fact. And it is not dismissed by whatever answer you can come up with in the origin of the universe. But they have to go over there because they can't deal with what's up here.
I think I'm good. If I had one, I think, to me, when someone says you're an angry or militant atheist, either they came across some venomous person down the way, or probably more often they're just going after the messenger. It's a lot easier to go after you than it is to address the facts. The other misconception I often hear is that you say God doesn't exist definitively if you're an atheist, and I don't take that position. Some do. I just say I simply do not believe. I'm an atheist. I don't believe it based on the evidence, and I'm examining evidence every single day. Jesus shows up tomorrow. Let's do that. We'll figure that out. If he exists, fine. That's step one. And then is he worth worshiping and following? That's step two. If whatever the truth is, whatever the reality of it is, that's what I want to know. And that's a common misconception. People say, you're an atheist. You say there is no God. Well, no, I just say I don't buy it based on the evidence, and I'm examining the evidence every day.
And if he does show up, I wouldn't advocate killing him again. Because nobody should have to give us 2 weekends. As what I would guess, I'm probably more the philosophy guy, the three of us especially, having done debates in that area. It's frustrating, this drilling down where they're beginning to attack the foundations of epistemology. And I've actually had to revise my position. Rather than giving a long answer that will put everybody to sleep, my Patreon stuff, which is free to everybody, I went back through the debate that I did with Seth and Bruggencake and talked about some of this in detail, and I also just posted a video addressing the topic of supernatural causation and how we seem to be blocked, and until somebody provides a mechanism to show that the supernatural exists and can be a cause of something, they have no grounds to say that it is in fact or is probably the cause of this thing. And so when they try to take it back to the foundational laws of the universe or the laws of logic, first of all, it may simply be incoherent to ask, why are they that way? It may be the case that they just fabricated it. This is the way it is. But worst case, you can say, I don't know. Do you have an explanation? And how is it that you know that your explanation is right? Because from where I sit, neither me nor Sai has an explanation for the laws of logic.
I'll explain who Sai is.
Sai's in Bruggencake, everybody know who that is?
Yep.
God, thank you. I'm glad some people didn't, because it makes me sad to think that everybody... So he's a presuppositionalist, and like many presuppositionalists, basically they're claiming to have solved all the problems of philosophy, the problem of hard solipsism, the problem of induction, because they just appeal to a God. And boy, that just seems simple. Oh, it's all God. But they can offer no justification for it, and they go a step further to say that no other worldview other than theirs can, which means they would have to disprove every other worldview, and they never make an attempt. They just, like cited, will ask me, how do you explain it? I don't have an explanation for it. I accept these as presuppositions, the primacy of reason, the reliability of reality, and the logical absolutes, and that's it. And it's kind of the same thing that we did with creation and evolution. If it turned out that we were wrong about evolution, or the Big Bang, or pick whatever scientific explanation, we found out tomorrow, boom, it's just wrong. That doesn't make them any more likely to be right. They actually have to present positive evidence for their claim. And if we found out we were wrong, then we're back at this, I don't know. And so there's lots of great mysteries, and I would like to think that we should go out and try to explore and solve them rather than pretending that Magic Man told us the answer.
Can I ask a question of the audience? Are any theists here? No one? Two? Who invited a theist? Did you give it a shot? Anyone? Yeah, a few people did. Fantastic. I'll hand it over.
Look, I had a comment quite some time ago, which was actually relating to your question about the obstacles we face, and which is essentially and we pretty much covered off on the great obstacle that we face in this country is everyone's apathy. It's the fact that we have the Prime Minister who
is Catholic, but not very obviously so if you listen to him talk most of the time. Every now and then he says something really religious, but most of the time it's just sort of hidden in the cracks. We have a society which is apparently very secular, but actually not nearly as secular as it appears to be. I mean, I'm sure you know about the separation of church and state language in our constitution. A little bit. Essentially, we had some reasonably strong language which was read down by the Supreme Court. So all of a sudden we don't actually have separation of church and state, when very clearly it was supposed to be. And there's an awful lot of that sort of thing going on that doesn't get addressed because the average Australian just doesn't see how much of a problem it is.
Can I ask something about that? When I was here for the Global Atheist Convention, someone was explaining to me how the Australian Constitution took the original language from the American Constitution, and where they saw ambiguities, they strengthened the language so that it was less ambiguous than our own Constitution, but the people who were reading it still managed to interpret it, despite the clarity, to read it kind of in the opposite way.
That's essentially correct, yeah. I mean, obviously I don't know what was going through their heads as they wrote the Constitution, but that's basically an explanation of how it happened. So we have, I mean, it's the age-old problem of a rogue state. We have a whole lot of people who basically just want to negotiate in good faith and goodwill and kind of get along and recognise the religion's fundamentally a little bit silly, but probably not that harmful. And you have a small core, like the ACL, like, unfortunately, our government at the moment, that are really big on forcing things through, but they do it in quite a secretive, conniving, slippery sort of way. You know, God doesn't get mentioned, but he does slip in the details a lot. This idea that a lot of these beliefs aren't very harmful, it's kind of dangerous. I see it a lot. And it's because you've taken a little grain of truth and kind of expanded it, not you. They have taken a little grain of truth and expanded it. The thing is, there's a gentleman who emailed me just yesterday. I was answering it in the car. Or someone emailed and said, why are you so concerned about it if people want to pray? Well, generally, I'm not too concerned about if somebody wants to pray in private or if they think it's doing good, mostly because I don't know about it. But even if you've managed to completely compartmentalize your religious beliefs so that they impact virtually nothing, that there's almost nothing derived directly from them, now you've made it useless and I don't care too much, but you came to believe those things for some reason. There's some mental heuristic in your brain that processed that claim and went true or believable. And even if that individual belief is ultimately harmless, that process is still there, and it's going to lead you to true when it shouldn't, in ways that are potentially more dangerous. That's why the t-shirt that I put out, I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. You have to have both prongs of that. If you just want to believe as many true things, well, believe everything. And if you just want to believe as few false things, believe nothing. You have to have both. Your goal needs to be to distill your internal model of reality such that it matches reality, and to develop the processes that allow you to assess claims to have them be more accurate. And that's the foundation.
We have an elected politician in my country that is in the news right now this week for having adopted some children and then turned one of those children, a 6-year-old girl, over to a criminal who raped her. The reason that this happened, the reason that this elected politician sent this little girl to live with this other person is because he couldn't get the demons out of her when he had her exorcised for possession. And this was the defense that he gave, that he couldn't exorcise her demons. This is the sort of person who gets to be in charge of running the community. In many places in the United States, you cannot be elected if you are a non-believer because non-believers are not considered to be moral. That man is considered to be moral because he's a religious person. So what happens when you let, they give an inch and they take a mile kind of thing, when you allow religion to influence to the point that you have to be religious, you have to believe that snakes and donkeys can talk before you can go at other people's lives, that's kind of insane. And as a result, my country is kind of insane.
I counted 5 face palms.
How long is our gathering today? What's our, I know some people are going to class. The reason I ask is that if you are still here when we sort of call it, I'd like to grab everyone and do a group photo with you guys. If something we put on our social media pages, if you don't mind your glamorous faces being put out there, it seems like it might be kind of fun. So if you're here when we finish, let's all group together out here, maybe in the lobby, and let's mark the occasion.
If we don't get
If you want to just grab it at the pub.
We might do it here where everyone can cram in one side and you guys down the front, bit of like a church photo or something, it'd be great. We have a question from Athens.
I see two hands up.
I'm going through in order, bear with me here.
Hey guys, thanks so much for coming out. I think I really appreciate this gathering because we can have a bit of understanding and dialogue. So I'm a member of the Evangelical Union, and we've been saying a lot about Christianity today, so I think I'd just like to ask a little bit about Christians and misrepresenting Jesus, for example. So you've been talking a lot about people like Pat Robertson, Ray Comfort, Han, people like that. And also mentioning things to do with examples of people who call themselves evangelicals who will do terrible things. I think we should all condemn that. But I was wondering, we had a gentleman before who was talking about barriers in dialogue, and that's a concern I have at this university, having that dialogue. Whether or not, in attacking those examples from all the set of evangelicals there are, whether or not we're in danger of building those walls and merely attacking the low-hanging fruit, as it were. So, for example, I wouldn't hold to young earth creationism. I'm not necessarily close to evolution, but I don't think that that is my self-compromising on my understanding of Scripture. And I was just wondering whether or not there's anyone in Christianity who you might describe as conservative who you respect or appreciate, and whether or not there could be any way forward with interacting with those kinds of people. Thank you.
So, one of the things, when you ask if there's any person that we might respect, all of them. When I address the topics, I'm only addressing the ideas and the claims, not the people. I mean, I was a fundamentalist Christian for 25 years, I'm going to be a minister. I'm an atheist because I try to be a better Christian and follow 1 Peter 15, etc. So it's now there are individuals who I might not respect, so there's probably going to be exceptions to that. But my concern isn't whether or not I like them or respect them. It's the views that they're presenting. And so when we talk about the low-hanging fruit, one of the more prominent and generally respected apologists would be like William Lane Craig or Rabbi Zacharias and those guys. Their arguments are no better. They are better at disguising the problems in those arguments. They are better public speakers. Craig is a skilled debater, but he's also formulaic. He gets up and the very first thing he does is state his position and define what the opposition must do to prove him wrong, which is automatically a shifting of the burden of proof, misrepresents the entire case. Because I'm not necessarily asserting there is no God. I'm waiting for those people who claim that there is good reason to believe in God to make the case. And they have uniformly failed. There's a reason why we've been having these debates for thousands of years. We make no progress. The arguments creep up and then they get shot down a little bit and they fall out of favor and there's a new version or something else is presented in a slightly different way. So we went from the cosmological argument, which, we poked a hole in it, so now we'll have the Kalam cosmological argument, and we'll poke holes in that. We get nowhere with the individuals who are the most vocal advocates. But I don't have the conversation with them to try to convince them. It's for the audience. One of the things we've learned as we learn more about the way the brain works and things like mirror neurons and the fact that if you've publicly stated a position, you're less likely to change your mind. But if you see someone who holds a view that you hold embarrassed, it encourages you to reevaluate it because you don't want to be in that embarrassed position. Not that I'm always targeting ridicule, but the conversations take many different forms, and I do this because I care about people, I care about what kind of world we live in, and because I respect them and I don't think they're stupid. If I thought, theists were stupid, why would I waste my time talking at them? I know that people can change their mind because I have, he has. I mean, there's nothing futile about it.
I'll let them all answer.
Right. If we were talking about like somebody that's advocating string theory, for example, would we measure the validity of string theory based on the proponent and his personal lifestyle, or his political or religious beliefs, or whether he was a rat, bastard, and criminal? You know, it wouldn't matter if we're talking about something that is demonstrable, verifiable. We're talking about beliefs. And in many cases, these beliefs can be shown to be wrong. And it doesn't matter that what that person does or what they believe in otherwise. We're talking about that one belief, irrespective of anything else.
I think if we sometimes will go after, I think some of them perhaps are the low-hanging fruits, certainly not all by a long shot, but we're talking about them because they are in many cases people in positions of great influence. There are people who form their worldviews around the Pat Robertsons and the Ken Hams and the Ray Comforts, and so we take great delight in sort of lampooning often the ridiculous arguments of what we consider to be damaging arguments that are made. As far as my own position on Jesus and the Jesus question, I was a dyed-in-the-wool true blue Sunday go to meeting. I was all in. I personally reject, I can speak only really for me here, but I rejected Jesus, the God-man Jesus, because beyond subjective personal experience claims, there was no evidence anywhere for the God-man Jesus. The arguments that are made when examined, honestly, objectively examined, really fall apart. The Josephus argument falls apart. The personal experience argument, you have to place it against personal experience arguments for any number of other religions and other deities and whatnot. You have to question the competence of Jesus if he did exist, the story of Jesus based on the Bible. And that's why in my culture, and this is true I'm sure with many religions, if you start as a fundamentalist, you're standing in the circle and you say, I believe the Bible is 100% true, and Adam and Eve, and I believe in hell and I below. And then when they become inconvenient, you take a step out and you say, well, I like the New Testament, I ignore the Old Testament. Some of it was for yesterday. And when that doesn't really work out, you step out and you say, well, it's a book with some really good stories in it, and I think we can learn, like we would learn from a philosophy book. And then you step further out and you say, I don't really hold to the Bible, I don't really care what's in there, but I do believe in Jesus. And then the next step after that is quite often I think there's something out there. And I think that's where most people hang out. Because the next step, the implications are pretty significant. If you then go from the vague deism, perhaps even attaching Jesus' name to it, if you take the next step, you are essentially starting to acknowledge that there is no evidence for any supernatural activity, any deities anywhere, and that's a scary, scary step for a lot of people. But I think Jesus is fair game. I think Jesus can take care of himself. I think if 2/3 of the planet are worshiping another deity or no other deity at all, it's not my fault, it's Jesus' fault. And I think he could part the curtain of the sky tonight and immediately solve the question. And I don't think I, as an insect here on this earth, who is supposedly not qualified to tell Jesus what to do, I don't buy that at all. I think, put up or shut up. If you're going to tell me to follow you, you're going to have to give me some damn good reasons and fast.
I'm going to let you address this. I thought of one good example that might make this a little more clear. Are you familiar with who Alvin Plantinga is?
Yeah.
Okay. So, he's a philosopher and a Christian who is probably most well known for coming up with the modologic version of the ontological argument, and not all the eyes glazed over. He has virtually no prominence. It's a very narrow subset of apologists who, it's not, I'm sure most of them would agree with him, but what he did was he took an argument and he intentionally, I don't want to say intentionally because it might not have been his plan, he specifically has obfuscated it so that you can't necessarily understand it. There's a tiny fraction of people who can understand this modologic version of the ontological argument. I don't find it convincing. I think it has the same problems that the original version had, that he's just found a way to hide them, and I think he's hidden them from himself. He's brilliant. I think he's kind of, fallen for his own stuff. So then when you know you're intelligent and you've thought about this, you can fool yourself. Magicians will tell you this all the time. And let's say for a moment that he was actually right. What does that tell me about God? If the best argument is something that a fraction of a percent of people can even begin to comprehend, what kind of ass does that? Create you here and is going to determine your salvation or your afterlife based on what you did or didn't accept. Presumably there may be other criteria. And then the best argument for this is something that the people that he created generally can't understand, and may in fact be so complicated and nuanced that you couldn't identify the flaw if there was one. I don't know.
But a better way to say that is, why would a benevolent deity ever require an apologist? Why would a benevolent deity ever need someone to come out and explain his perfect message?
Why would you judge someone based not on their actions but on their beliefs? Why would you judge them on their beliefs at all?
All right, thanks for that. I'll just do a brief comeback and then I'll pass on. So I guess my main point was that I don't think it's going to help dialogue if we attack silly examples. And so, for example, Alvin Plantinga, by and large, would not be a silly example. He's a respected academic. And I think if we attack things like, the prosperity preachers, or the precepts, or the exorcism examples, which I think aren't very good anyway, it would be the equivalent as if, say, the Christians, which I think happens in America a lot, will compare a Darwinist or a non-theist with immoral people or a Stalinist or something, which is crazy. It's clearly not conducive to civic discourse. I'm not accusing you guys of that. I'll just say, I think it'd be better for everyone if we could have a bit more understanding of the most robust sides of each position, and I guess have a more fair dialogue. We can point out funny examples and laugh, but I think that's not going to help our goal at the end of the day. So which is why I like something like this, because we can come together and we can point this stuff out and move forward.
I'm in agreement. I'm not necessarily in agreement that there is anything that would qualify as robust, and I realize that's a little glib, kind of dismissive. But when we talk about what we're going after as to whether or not it's fostering dialogue, like we mentioned earlier, we may have different issues in the US. So when 52% of the American population don't accept evolution and represent themselves as fundamentalists, that's where the bigger problem is. I'm always going to go after the bigger problem if I can, if it's something that I can approach. I am friends with a number of preachers and theologians, and you and I might end up being friends at some point. The Reverend Barry Lynn is a Christian who is the president of Americans United for Church-State Separation. He and I agree on maybe everything except whether or not a God exists, and yet he still identifies as a Christian. But I come from a fundamentalist background, and if there are going to be 1,000 different denominations that all identify as Christian and all point to the same book and the same label, I try not to paint too broadly, but it's not my fault if you're standing next to the person that I'm painting. And so, while I don't lump them all in as Westboro Baptist Church, the God hates fags people, if they're still pointing to the same book, it's the reason why I primarily go after the book. I am a huge proponent of, here's what the Bible says, let's talk about it. Why does the Bible explicitly, clearly endorse slavery? How can that be from the mind of the morally wise compass of the universe, and get it, not just forget to mention, hey, maybe you shouldn't own people, but get it exactly backwards, telling you who you can own, how you can own them, how you can beat them. This doesn't make sense. And it's actually what I'm going to be kind of doing tonight in a little bit, is I'm doing kind of a one-man play as God, starting in Genesis, working the way through to show this comedy of failures that he has, where he's got this plan and it just keeps going wrong.
It will eventually be on YouTube if you...
Yes.
Yeah, I know he's piqued your curiosity. He's like, Matt is God, I've got to see this. It will post on YouTube here, I think, within the next 6 weeks.
And I plan to do a follow-up as Satan.
Is anybody coming tonight?
Yeah.
Oh, this is great news. Guys, just really quickly, I've had several people who would like to ask a second question, so I don't feel that I haven't paid attention to you. We've got a whole bunch of people to get through. If there's still time, we'll come back to you. Take it away.
I'm Cameron. Hi. I just want to get your ideas on my view that what if religion is, it's less of like a debate about whether or not there's a supernatural deity that governs everything. It's more of an institution we've created for control, where like you have, say, a clergy or a ruler who wants to be friends with the clergy, and they use religion to control their population and kind of solidify their power. For example, in the 2012 elections in your country, you had Chris Santorum as a potential Republican candidate.
I'm sorry.
And he really appealed to the far-right Christian base. And in one of the speeches he went to, he got this batshit crazy pastor to, spout the Christian ideology and talk about how gays are evil, America's Christian, Constitution says America's Christian, everyone does believe it out. And that really got their support. So do you think this idea is like, is there a God, is there Jesus, was around? It's kind of a front for a much darker sort of issue that throughout human history, rulers always try to use religion to just like intellectually pacify and neuter the population. But that's the real underlying thinking.
What the founder of American Atheists got famous for was, according to the Christian community, she removed prayer from school and stopped people from being able to pray in school. In fact, that was not at all the case. What had happened was that children in school were forced to pray. And it didn't matter what your religion was, you were going to pray to a Protestant-type Christian prayer. Doesn't matter if you're Hindu, if you're Jewish, Jehovah's Witness, whatever. And this was led by the teacher. So this was a government official in a sense, because education was federal. Then the teacher is leading the school, regardless of individual religion. You can't opt out. This was being forced on you. So all that changed as a result of that was that children were no longer being forced to be reverent to and express belief in a religion that was not their own. And this was mischaracterized by the Christians, who in fact want to continue to do that. They want to continue to force children to give the pledge under God. And sometimes we have a state pledge, which also has under God. And you're right, it's a means of manipulation of the masses, and they want to extort support.
Go ahead.
I say.
When you're here with Matt and Aaron, you just sit back and watch them go. I'm just as excited as you guys are.
Can we get a hug for Seth, please?
I'll be as brief as I possibly can.
Hey.
What time is it? So this issue of control, the thing to recognize is that religions exist because they are good at meeting the needs of us as social creatures. That is automatically going to make itself available for exploitation. I'm a secular humanist. I'm an advocate for the fact that we are social creatures, and one of the things that the secular community needs to do is provide a landing place for people who are living religions. We need to be about more than just, oh, there is no God, or we don't believe in God, or this is silly. We need to be about living communities. And that is always potentially exploitable. But I always caution people not to go the step further to imply that religions were like an invention specifically created to control the masses. Because I'm pretty much convinced that they arose naturally out of mistakes in our thinking and the needs that we have and who we are.
I think we, in the atheist movement, especially when I really started in 2009, were often averse to coming together in groups like this. Have you ever had someone say to you, you're going to an atheist gathering? Well, that's just atheist church, right?
Yeah.
And you blanch a little bit because they were insinuating, and maybe you worried yourself if you traded one group in for another. I was a sheep before. I'm not going to be a sheep again. I'm not a member of the herd. But the truth is that community is something that human beings do. We are a relational species. We must connect, or most of us must connect. Church does that extremely well. Ask people in the honest part of their heart why they go to church on Sunday. Do they really go because they care about whatever dissection of the book of John or Mark or Revelation is being done? Or do they go because there's a greeter at the door who says, hey John, I'm so glad to see, we missed you, how are the kids? We got coffee on, we got donuts, they get communal music, they get hugs, they get friendship, there's support programs. They have this relational community itch being scratched. The church does not own this. The church has stamped a brand of ownership upon it and said, actually, this is us. This is what we do. But community existed long before churches ever did. And I think one thing that does make religion attractive to people is its home. It's their family. That's often why they become so defensive when you speak out against the falsehoods being taught from church, because you're sort of going after a member of the family, a part of their in-group. And as we, as a culture, become more comfortable with the reality that, hey, we're better in numbers. You complete me, right? If we embrace that and provide the community in a situation where falsehoods aren't required, fantasy isn't required, in fact, we celebrate and cultivate living in the real world, then I think the power of religion will continue to diminish exponentially.
If we just had community groups, in like if every community had like a weekly potluck kind of thing that they just traditionally went to, where the only reason you would go is because you're going to meet your neighbors like you do every week, and there's no religion required for that, it's the same sort of thing. It doesn't have to be atheist either. Well, there are atheist groups that do that, and we all need a sense of community.
I just wanted to comment, just take it back to what he said about silly examples and us laughing about it. It's not a silly example if people who are doing that are in positions of power. So to say that he was trying to exorcise the devil out of her and that rape was a permissible method, and yeah, we could have laughed about that, but he's in a position of power. And yeah, I just wanted to comment about that. And I have two questions. My first one is how you approach religious extremism.
Adding to what you said before, Rick Santorum's name came up. He ran for president of the United States. Pat Robertson's name came up. He ran for president of the United States. Imagine what either of these people would have done had they gotten that office. Just to back up what you said.
So yeah, about the silly example that, you know, like, I think you said it wasn't important and that we were just laughing about it, whereas I read some of his quotes when you said have some fun, read some quotes, so I did in that like 10 minutes, and he said something about feminism makes women turn against their husbands and want to kill their kids. And as in a position of power, religious women reading that would probably believe something like that and would want to steer away from feminism, which is the exact opposite of what feminism is. So yeah, I just wanted to like note that it is important that we address these silly examples, because these people in power are actually have followers and are in great numbers. So.
Now, to address your second question about how to deal with religious extremism, I only know one method. And that is, I can't make a metric of how much of religion is permissible and what point I need to start objecting. The only thing I can do is attack the entirety of it. So if you bring to me a belief that is unsubstantiated, that belief is unsubstantiated. It doesn't matter how much of it you embrace or how much of it you reject, how moderate or reasonable you are. If you tell me that you think that a snake talked or that a donkey talked, I'm going to argue against that position. Whatever the religious belief is, I'm going to attack it.
I think that there's an opportunity, like I mentioned earlier, Mary Lynn, we work together. We're working for church separation, even though we disagree on the God thing. And when it comes to a lot of the harm done specifically by religious extremism, I'm very happy to grab allies wherever I can find them, because that's quite often where the most harm is. It depends on the specifics. So when it comes to like Westboro Baptist Church, which is definitely extremism, they're the ones that are running around picketing funerals. They tried to go to Leonard Nimoy's funeral, but they couldn't find it, which just made me giggle. They're gonna run around and they're just being terrible human beings in general. The thing is, my parents, and well, some family members, agree with their positions entirely. They just don't agree with their tactics. And so they're never going to speak up about Westboro because, well, yes, maybe they're not being very Christ-like when they run around picketing funerals, but they're spreading the correct message. They're spreading the message that the Bible specifically endorses, and my parents are Bible-believing Christians. There are liberal and moderate Christians, and we're kind of picking on Christianity. That's kind of my bailiwick, but it applies to elsewhere as well, to Islam and maybe not. I don't know if are there extremist Scientologists? but
Yes.
there are extremist Buddhists, but the liberal and moderates don't often engage and say, oh no, those people aren't right, and there's a really good reason for it. Because when you compare Westboro's biblical foundation for their beliefs to what the moderates believe, Westboro is on stronger footing. The only thing that the liberal and moderates can say is, I have a different understanding of this, or Jesus has personally revealed this to me, or the Holy Spirit has guided me to an understanding that you're wrong. And on theological grounds, on orthopraxy and reading the Holy Book, it is the fundamentalists and extremists that are right. And the only solution out of that is to cherry pick other verses. And the thing about the verses are that some of them are general and some of them are specific. And the fundamentalists are following the specifics, and the liberals and the moderates are following the general. And so when the Bible says, thou shalt not kill, but run out and kill the Amalekites and everybody else who's in that line of people, the general rule is kind of don't run around killing people, except for the ones I tell you. The specific case is an exception. And so some of them are just focused on don't kill, turn the other cheek, love thy neighbor. Let me pick out the good bits and say that these are the rule for everything. But if you had a board game that had a general rule with a specific clarification below it, the specific takes precedence in the context that it applies. So we don't get a lot of help from them. And so it's ironic in the United States that the people who are quite often most vocal in favor of and in support of religious freedom are atheists. Because we're the ones who understand that our freedom is the one that needs to be, you don't need a law to protect a popular opinion. You need laws to protect the unpopular opinions. I will occasionally go after the more ridiculous ones with ridicule and mockery. Because it kind of hits something in people's heads where they're like, yes, this is so bizarre. So I love the counter-protest when Westboro goes out, and there's gay pride festivals and lots of rainbow flags or posters and stuff kind of going after them. The extremists that are actually far more violent, I don't think mockery or ridicule is going to get you anywhere, although I'm still okay with doing it. I mean, I'll draw Muhammad all day long. If you want to kill me for that, you're just showing what's wrong with your beliefs. But where real, tangible, violent harm is being done to people, we have to do more than just deal with it on religious terms. We're going to have to get governments involved and bodies involved to stop it. So we are not enough.
Well done. I'm very impressed. Matt hasn't hung up on anyone yet.
Seth was asking earlier what kind of challenges you face. And I came from a very strict, devout Christian family. I was brought up as an Orthodox Christian. I was an evangelical myself, and I was a deacon at the church, and I came a long way to openly declare myself agnostic. Today, I'm the only agnostic person in my class doing major studies in biblical studies in Sydney University. So I kind of gathered through the past few years most of the answers that I needed to be really a free thinker. But one of the things that I still struggle with today, especially when I debate with my family who still remain Christian, is the supernatural or the superstitious argument. And one of the things I would like to know your position, or what's your response when someone throws this argument to you, is, for example, what would you make of the apparitions? Over 120,000 people in Egypt in the 1960s saw Saint Mary on top of the church appearing over a period of 2 weeks. Everyone saw her. How can you deny that? And obviously, if you can't provide that, I usually say that not to have the answer is okay. I can say I don't know. There's nothing wrong with that. But they usually throw back at you, or if you don't know, here, that's a proof of the supernatural, that there are good spirits out there.
Unlike these two gentlemen, they were very much into the standard type of Christianity. I was more into the occult aspect. I was like the neo-pagan type, and I was very much into meditation and different form of spirituality. And I had experiences that I personally remember. I don't have to listen to how other people saw some apparition. I saw apparitions myself, and I remember them very clearly. And that was a problem that I had to wrestle with when I realized that there was no substance, no form of support for any of the things that I believed. Yet I remember seeing these things and experiencing them. And I remembered it so vividly. And I had to question them. And finally, I came to a very difficult decision where I realized that I couldn't believe in my own memory the things that I remember happening and seeing, because it wasn't possible. And yet I knew people that had experienced this with me. And if I would ever find them again, they would be able to back this up. And how would I deal with that if I ever met them? And through the magic of the internet, I did eventually meet these people that I knew 20 years earlier, what have you. And when I talked about these memories that I thought we all shared in common and remembered exactly the same way, they remembered it completely different and couldn't corroborate what I thought I had experienced. And they were there. You know, and they were part of their participation in those events was part of the reasons that I still believed so long into it. The things that I saw, the apparitions that I had seen that I thought they had seen as well. Because if they're saying the same apparition, then it's not a hallucination, right? So that's a reality. I misremembered something. They didn't remember at all. So, and mind you, I had to make the decision, even if they had come back and said that they remembered it exactly the way that I did, there still had to be another explanation, because what I remembered can't actually have been.
I always say that, you know, mass delusion is still delusion. And an unsubstantiated personal experience claim, whether it's done by, you know, many or one, sort of leaves us in the same boat. I was speaking to the owner of the Christian radio station I used to work for. I was a Christian broadcaster for 12 years, and I had the owner of the Christian radio station come on my atheist show because he felt he had heard an argument for God that no atheist had heard yet. I'm like, yeah, you knock yourself out there. But I mean, as someone who's interested in good science, let's do it. So I brought him on, and essentially it was a personal experience argument again. But he was talking about how his wife wasn't supposed to have children, and you know, they prayed, and then she all of a sudden was pregnant, and how could you explain this, that kind of thing. My mother said she was in the operating room after a horrible car accident. She was under the anesthetic, and yet she was floating over her body, and she saw the operation taking place. She heard the voices of the doctors. She then came back after the fact and was able to relate what had happened. How would she know these things if she hadn't been part of a spiritual plane, left her physical body, being dead for 2 minutes or whatever? And ultimately, all these stories, impressive or not, still come back to personal experience claims and subjective human perception. The human brain, what we see, what we think we see, what we hear, what we think we hear, isn't necessarily what happened. I was talking to the guys about a great show I've been watching on Netflix called Brain Games, where they use very basic, or after the fact, you realize they're basic, perception tricks to sort of make you or trick you into seeing something differently than it actually is. And you are convinced you are correct until they explain what they actually did. This is why eyewitness testimony in court cases is so hugely unreliable, you know. So I think ultimately, how do you phrase it, Aaron? Only something has practical application. It's a great tagline, and I'm trying to recall it at the moment.
Only accurate information has practical application.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. AronRa, I'll be here all night.
So I just did a video, which you can check out on my YouTube channel, about supernatural causation that goes into this, without giving like a full-on philosophy 101 lecture. From Hume, we learned that revelation is necessarily first person, and to everybody else it's hearsay. It's one of my favorite quotes. It's not so much, the thing to get through their head is that you're not saying that their explanation is in fact wrong. You're saying you don't understand why they think their explanation is correct. We have an event And they are seeking to explain it. This is why you get the, well, how do you explain this if it's not for X? Well, that is the argument from ignorance fallacy, or more accurately, an argument from personal incredulity fallacy, in that I can't think of a better explanation from this. And yet the explanation they're offering is not an explanation. It has no explanatory power. We explain things in terms of other things that we understand. And what they're doing is trying to solve a mystery by appealing to a bigger mystery, an all-encompassing mystery. And the one example that I've used many times to pretty good effect is to ask them, do you believe that these people who say they've been abducted by aliens have in fact been abducted by aliens? Now if they say yes, you're done, and you'll have to talk about other things, because they're willing to actually kind of believe anything. But there are people you can go talk to who will tell you their alien abduction story, and they have similar accounts. And how do you explain that if it didn't happen? How do these people from various locations have similar accounts if it's not actually happening? When you can do the same thing with other religions. You talk about these people who have seen visions of Mary or have had the near-death experiences. Well, one thing we know about near-death experiences is that you tend to see the religious imagery that you grew up with or that you currently accept. And so if a Hindu has religious imagery, it's not going to be the same as a Catholic. But if somebody's saying, oh, all these people saw this, how is that any different from somebody telling me about the God-man in India, who has been sitting there supposedly living off prana for years, and there are people, constantly coming over and saying, oh yes, we witnessed it, we witnessed it, we lived it. How did you investigate this, and how did you come to the conclusion that your proposed supernatural explanation is most likely correct, when I don't even see that you've made a demonstration that it exists, is possible, plausible, or probable as an explanation?
Bela Lugosi's last movie was this horrific thing called Planet 9 from Outer Space, where flying saucers that look a lot like hubcaps resurrect zombies, including Dracula, essentially. Why would a zombie be wearing a cape in the 1950s? Anyway, so you have the story about these zombies trying to take over people so they can do this alien abduction takeover of the world, and then there's the announcer of the movie who says, can you prove that it didn't happen? So we're reversing the burden of proof then.
Very quickly, we've got time for one more question, because I've been warned that the pizza will be stone cold. I'll hand it over here, because you've been waiting for quite some time. Very, very quickly, when you were mentioning the story about the radio boss of your previous radio station, how they prayed and had a child, was it the prayer that caused the child, or was there no other part? It's a very familiar story. It sounds biblical. Here you go.
Hi there. I feel like there's mass confusion around the world of like what atheism is. Could I get a clarification, just so I can use it for future reference on a talking table? Do you guys reckon atheism is believing there's no God, or believing in you reckon it exists, or like you guys just don't believe in it?
Okay, the best way to clarify this, I have a dear friend who is an atheist and refuses to admit that. And he says, well, I believe there's something. And so, well, great, is that something that you believe? We all believe there's something. But is it a God? And what is a God? A God is from all I can tell, from all the stories of everything that was universally accepted as God by thousands of people, millions of people for thousands of years, a God is a magical, anthropomorphic, immortal. So is that what you believe in? And my friend, of course, would say no. Well, if you're not convinced that an actual deity really exists, then you're atheist. Atheist means without theism. And theism is a religious belief that includes a God. If you are without theism, that's atheist. That's what the definition is. It doesn't mean that you know that there's no God. It doesn't mean that you believe in nothing if you're just not convinced.
Guys, I think that's a fantastic answer, a great way to wrap it up. As Seth has requested, he'd love a photo of everyone who can get together.